Well, hello again, and welcome to another episode of Wrestling Beyond the Pulpit with the Good News Gang. I am your host, Pastor Matt West from Marble Memorial United Methodist Church in Milan. And I'm joined today by Pastor Matt Osborne from Millington UMC, Pastor Kim Metzer from Hope and Welcome Corners UMC in Hastings, and Pastor Curtis Clark from Marysville UMC. Good morning, my friends. How are you today?
Good morning.
Good morning.
2 thumbs up. There we go. Can't ask for any more, right? Well, we are glad to be able to gather once again to wrestle with whatever is on our mind this week. And so we've got some new discussion points to share with everybody, and we hope you will join in the conversation and maybe even continue it afterwards. But we've been using some questions from a I don't know, a website or what put together called Pub Theology. And so each week there's an icebreaker question to kind of get the conversation rolling. And I'm curious to see what your answers are for this one. But if you didn't know your age, how old would you think you'd be?
Well, if I didn't know my age, time would be relative. I would have no concept of time.
Ooh.
Thank you, Dr. Sheldon Cooper.
Wow. Wow.
Kind of hard to follow that one up.
I feel like the water is deeper than I can swim the second we jumped in right now. This is supposed to be the icebreaker, not the brain twister.
Well, we want to thank you for tuning in this week. It's been great.
It's been real. Goodbye.
And with that, we'll say goodbye. Gosh, if I did, that's the thing is like I'm a terrible judge of age, because I look and I'm like, gosh, they seem older than I am. And then, you find out, or like with a celebrity, I'll Google and I'm like going, no way, like they're the same age. Or, like I don't even think about my age most of the time until like there's some sort of time reference where it's like, you're talking about a movie and it was like, gosh, what was that? Just a few years ago. And then you look at that and it was like, no, that came out 20 years ago. And you're like, what?
Yeah.
Somebody posted the other day that 2021 to 1980 is like 1980 to 1939.
Yeah.
Kills me.
Matt, you made the great point. I think I heard it was some kind of, like 25th anniversary of like, I don't know, Saving Private Ryan maybe, or Forrest Gump. And I'm like, no.
Right. Because then you actually have to think about your age, and then you're going, oh my gosh.
Yeah. Well,
I was an adult when that came out. So that
right. When my wife and I have been married for 26 years. So when someone says, oh, it's a quarter of a century. Quarter of a century? Come on. I mean, because I can remember when my parents celebrated 25 years, we had a big party for them and this and that.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
Wait a minute.
Well, and it doesn't it seem odd, like, to say like 1999, like that seems like,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I would also think in terms of this question, like how many of us, when it's our birthday and people ask and you're like, oh, 25 again,
Right.
Like, if I didn't know my age, I'd probably say, no, I'm 25.
There's mornings when I definitely know my age, when it's like,
right. I forget.
Put the tea on the ground. It's like, snap, crackle, pop. I'm like, or like my wife says, she'll say, I feel like a glow stick in the mornings, the way I'm popping.
Yep. So my baby turned 27 a couple weeks ago. Yeah, that just hits. He's 3 years away from 30. He's the baby. Right. How is this? I feel 30, 35. How do I have a... Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
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 Certainly something to think about. How old would you be if you didn't know your age? That's well, and what's interesting too, so my mom hosted an exchange student from Korea, and they actually like like you're one when you're born. Like that's year one. So I mean, we could be born the same year, but over there they'd be like a year older than we would consider, over here. So I mean that adds to the confusion as well.
Right.
Like,
Sure. Right. And it makes me crazy when people, like they so I turned 53 this year. This is not my 53rd year. This is my 54th year of being alive. So
right.
Yeah. But if I put on my birthday, if I post on Facebook, hey, I'm looking forward to year number 54, people will chime in with, well, you're only 53. Yes.
Guess it depends on how you count revolutions around this planet.
Well, when in this country, babies are not one until they have a birthday.
Right.
Anniversary of their birthday.
The womb, yes.
Right.
Yes.
Well, Matt, I think it's an interesting question because you used to have a haircut that was similar to mine. And then when we basically around COVID time, things changed for you in the last year and a half. So I think my question for you would be, do you think that, or have you got any comments that you looked younger or older with shorter hair or longer hair?
Ooh, good question.
So at my previous church, I was told by some ladies in my congregation that I looked younger when I had hair versus shaving it. I personally don't see it, but I mean, some people do. If anything, I get more the fact that, they can't believe that my hair is still dark, like I'm not that old. I mean, I realize I got some snow in my chin here, but it's not like, I'm that old. Of course, I did get a compliment at the gym last week where I was sharing with somebody that, about our oldest son who's 26. And then they looked at me and said, oh, you don't look old enough to have a 26-year-old. And I'm like, well, thank you.
And, and I would say reversely for that, our daughter's 10. Yeah. And so there's this natural assumption that I'm in my 40s because I have a 10-year-old. And I'm 53, and we had our kids later in life. And so when people see me with my daughter, I think there is this assumption that, he must, be a younger guy, but.
Hey, at least you're not
getting her grandpa.
Yeah, I was going to say, at least you're not getting mistaken for that.
Yeah.
When she was younger, that happened. That happened a couple of times. Actually, one of her former a speech therapist mistook Rita and I for her grandparents.
Oh, boy.
And actually asked, she asked our daughter, so, do you have any, nicknames for your grandparents? And she says, no, I call them mom and dad. And the teacher's look was like,
man.
So.
Oh, no, you didn't go there.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Well, moving right along. So with this question about our age, the next one I have for you is if you restarted your life from scratch, would you end up in the same place?
Would I know then what I know now?
This isn't a philosophy class. Listen here, Socrates.
I would say no, because the world would be different.
Yeah.
Oh. I mean, I think at some level we'd like to think we would, because we all have families and we love those our kids and our spouse and so I think we'd like to think that we'd end up in that same spot, but I don't know. I agree with
I would
Kim.
have to agree with Kim, though. It would be, I guess it would be a matter of whether I knew what I know now versus like completely.
Yeah.
But
I don't think that question.
Because I think, for myself, like had I finished my undergrad degree, would I have ended up where I'm at right now? Because I could have ended up somewhere else, because I was going to school to be a teacher. I don't know if I would have ended up where I was at if I took
one
that
different
course.
decision.
Yeah.
Right.
Just
Yeah.
one decision differently, and you'll end up in a completely different place.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and to share a couple of things, like I think that question almost has to have into it that you would know, because you do the exact same things that you would know differently. Because I liken the whole Back to the Future thing. Like if you go back, like what year would you go back? What day would you relive to do differently? And oftentimes I think of, my senior year in high school. Because there was two significant things that I think kind of led me down the path I'm at now. Is I definitely would not have taken the car ride that day when I got in a car accident, and it changed my face forever. And, it gave me a lot of thinking, but it really altered kind of the way I perceived myself and what some of my goals were. It really did. It gave me an about face. So without that, I think my face might look a little bit better, but I wonder if some of my attitudes might have changed when I was a teenager, for the better. And at the same time, I'm also thinking, what you might not know about me is that I actually tried out for the cheerleading team my senior year, and I made it. And the varsity coach actually had an in because there is a lack of experienced male cheerleaders. She said she could have got me a full ride, not guaranteeing that my housing and stuff would be paid for, but my tuition would be paid for. She's like, literally, if you let her, and I can recommend you for going in there, because I was a weight training and a football athlete and stuff like that. So I could do the mounting and the college stuff, that I could have went to Eastern for a really low cost. And, around the time got in my accident. And at the same time, still could have done some of those functional things, but I was kind of intimidated by the big inner city 4-year university, campus life thing. So I went to a community college. I think those things are huge that would lead me to different paths because you just met and your experience would have been different. And so it's very interesting to go, if I could do it again, like Curtis said, I would like to think it, God, what an adventure, but who knows who I wouldn't meet and, that kind of stuff. But those are pretty pivotal things those aren't even the theological, philosophical decisions, would I have done this and done that? It's just a teenager decision, I valued prom more than my potential future.
Well, and I mean, maybe something that could factor in too is how much do we believe, God guides our journey?
Right.
So I mean, that could also affect whether we would take, the end up in the same place.
Or free will.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who's getting philosophical now?
Just learning from you, my mentor.
I feel like we're more of the Bill and Ted presentation.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, definitely. Definitely.
Jackie, darn it. I need Jax here.
I mean, you need a little Socrates in your life every once in a while, know. So the interesting thing about this week's discussion is there's a picture that came with these questions, and so it's actually from a bumper sticker, and it was seen in South Carolina. It's a picture of Jesus. I'll describe it to you. It's a picture of Jesus holding a AK-47, and it says, "If Jesus had a gun, he'd still be alive today. Discuss."
All right, Socrates, what do you got?
Well, I guess from science or ingenuity standpoint, if they were able to build guns back in Jesus' time, that would be pretty impressive. It just goes completely against everything that Jesus did, that I can't even imagine, like, trying to even contemplate him having a gun, to survive versus being crucified.
But what's wrong with having a gun? There's nothing wrong with having a gun.
No, I'm not saying that.
My thought is, if Jesus had a gun, everything would have still played out because he would have been a responsible gun owner, and he wouldn't have just been holed up in his house. He would still been out and about. I don't know. I don't think he would have had one. But
I think and we could play with this all day long. We really could.
We could.
There's a lot of interesting points of view. When I first saw the question and the image, my first thought is, it was God's will that Jesus died on the cross.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That was the plan all along.
Yep.
And so, a gun, a tank, a nuclear bomb wasn't going to stop what God had started.
Right.
That was the plan.
Yep.
And Jesus was the fulfillment of God's plan. And so, obviously they're using the images to make a political statement because it's theologically weak.
Very.
It has nothing to stand on. And it goes against everything that Jesus preached and stood for.
I would see that, and I would hope that there's a way to take a different, go different directions where I was going behind this bumper sticker. I'd have to make sure I could pass very quickly, or I would just take a longer route, because I feel like whoever has that bumper sticker probably has a short temper or road rage tendencies. So, literally, when I see that would sort of freak me out and go, I really don't want to be next to you and behind you and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But this is a great question that I think even beyond our own discussion, because you just get a lot of mileage out of.
You do. And it's another one of those polarizing issue. I will say I went shooting last week with some of our kids. They are gun aficionados, however you pronounce that. Shot a variety of guns, including my own that I won in a raffle last year. I finally got to shoot it. A 410. If I wanted to go hunting for varmints, I could use it. But I won't, because I won't eat them. And that is my philosophy, is if you're going to go hunting, then it's for food. But we just shot for fun. So shot my son's AR-15, handgun or two, and my 410.
My thought though is because I've went out and shot guns with friends, as well, but in my mind, there is a huge difference between shooting at a target and shooting at a human being.
Oh, absolutely.
Because that was a discussion we had in terms of security at my previous appointment okay, yes, we can legally carry firearms, but can you tell me in a split second you're going to be able to pull the trigger on another human being?
Right.
I don't think I could. So I'm looking at this going,
but I wouldn't carry because I couldn't do it.
Right. So especially I guess
after target shooting and feeling the power.
Right. And I'm just kind of thinking that way with Jesus. Is he really going to want to pull the trigger on another human being? But I also look at the avenue that Curtis brought up, and that I think there's some politics behind this bumper sticker, which that just irks me when you start bringing politics into religion.
And I think too, we know that there's parts of the gospel where Jesus, before they leave to go out to the garden to pray, Jesus tells them to bring a sword or a club. But then we also know that as soon as Peter draws that sword and cuts off the ear of the guard, Jesus chastises him and says, no, that's not the way this is going to go down.
Right.
And so I guess I'm drawn to the question too, this person who had this bumper sticker, we make the assumption that they're a Christian. Is this a good witness?
No.
Having a bumper sticker like that in the back of your car?
No, because it creates reactions like Matt's, where he wants to get away from that person. Well, that's not what we're called to do.
Does it draw people closer to Christ?
Mm-hmm.
If anything, I think it dismisses it. There's one of those zealots.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And stereotypes.
In scripture time, right? There were so many people that thought Jesus would be the gun toter or the militant person, and it was such a departure, from that.
They were shocked and annoyed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, he made lessons. Part of his red letter dialogue was I didn't come to do that, you know?
Right.
And so it's interesting that even now you're kind of like, well, if we could just make him be who we wanted to be, well, it takes away, you know, really the entire purpose.
Well,
Right.
and I also sit here and think as you're talking about this, you know, like, you know, the idea of Jesus still being alive today, like,
Yes.
is the hope that like things would be different in the world? Because if that
Right.
were the case, then maybe we wouldn't need guns. You
Well,
know,
and
That's the whole. I mean, he died and rose again. That's the whole basis of it. If he were still alive today, then
there'd be no resurrection, there'd be no Christianity.
right? Because it would go back to that
Just
whole
the
from
prophet.
if we started from scratch, where would we still end up in the same place? I mean, if
Right.
Jesus was still physically alive, you know, and didn't die on the cross, like, would we still be in the same place?
mm-mm.
Right. We'd still be carrying around the burden of our sin.
Mhm.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
And if anything, things could potentially be worse.
Right.
Yeah. You know, and even then with that poor theological message, like Jesus still lives. That's what we preach.
Right.
So it's not like, you know what I mean? He
It's-
does live. So
he
it
does.
it's just a very head shaking why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was-
It is certainly interesting, though. I mean, Christian or not, you know, if a Christian did make this sticker or something, you know, just the different viewpoints that some churches hold in terms of like, it's okay that Jesus would have used a gun if he had it, you know, and certainly some of these other beliefs and things that we've hit on, you know, and justifying it. And so it's not an easy conversation.
Nope.
Matt, you had something you were going to say?
Well, and you know, and this has huge implications because they're putting Jesus in this picture.
Right.
Right. So I mean, that's what makes the whole thing. But I wonder, what if we even simplified it down a little bit to what if it was Martin Luther King Jr. in that picture?
Mm.
Or what if it was like, and of course, you know, the holiday and those kind of things. But like, what if it was, who was the Beatle that was shot right on the road?
John Lennon.
John Lennon.
John Lennon.
What if he had a gun? Would he be alive today? You know, when you look at his personality, was not about that. So it was just one of those things where you put anybody in there who you could say, well, you know, if they had a way to defend themselves, you know, they would be alive today. And I think just those two examples, and again, plug anybody in there, I think that's still kind of a disturbing bumper sticker.
Well, yeah, it is. And I mean, you look at JFK. JFK was surrounded by guns, still died.
Well, and that was something I was going to say is, I mean, look at war. I mean, just because you have a gun doesn't guarantee that you could be alive still.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
And that's just kind of like, this is the answer. And you're like,
Yeah, that's just sad. It just makes that
Yeah.
bumper sticker makes me sad.
yeah.
So Karen Armstrong has pointed out that all the major religions of the period between 800 and 200 BCE, known as the Axial Age, shared the same sense of purpose of existence.
Reciprocity.
Yes, the rest of, I honestly could say I've never come across that word before. Reciprocity, sure. Compassion, love, and altruism. The golden rule, ending suffering for all human beings. If this is so, why does religion get such a bad rap, and where does it go wrong?
Hmm.
Mm.
Well, I think.
Oh,
Oh,
The young man in the corner
yes,
there.
Rorschach.
Yes.
Carry on.
Horshack reporting for class.
Looking
Is-
good, Mr. Carter.
You know, when I first saw this one, even though the last question was kind of one that's fun to talk about, this is kind of the one that jumped out because I think right away I wanted to hit the buzzer and go, I think it's a bad rap because all those things, I think everybody, even humanity, like no matter religion or not, humanity wants those things for one another, but it's just a living it out.
Yeah.
You know, we study and we learn and have these expectations of our life. So we want them, but rarely do we live them out to the extent that it would change the world. I think that's why it gets a bad rap, that you spend all this time learning about it. You're a member of the church for 30 years and then you get your feelings hurt and you don't come back.
Well, I think,
right.
Well, I mean 30
all
years of
that's
teaching
in
is
there.
forgiveness and stuff, so.
I think religion has become so legalistic. That's why it gets a bad rap, is if you don't follow this, and this that our denomination says that you need to do, you're not good. You're going to hell.
Right. I think when we put boundaries on things like compassion and love and grace and reciprocity and all these things, these like Pastor Kim said, these human-made, instituted doctrines on compassion and love, then we're putting boundaries on God, I think.
Yeah.
And we've got a group in church right now we're studying the Gospel of John, and we were in John 9 this week, where Jesus heals a man who's been born blind, and the belief was that this man was a sinner from birth, or his parents had sinned, or someone in his family line had sinned because he was born blind. And we see at the end of the story, he's giving thanks to Jesus and worshiping Jesus, and what happens to him? He's kicked out of the temple. And it's the reminder that that religion had become so legalistic in that day that even the poor blind person who had been healed, who now confesses and recognizes Jesus as Lord, gets kicked out of church.
Right.
And it was a power struggle, and that's what I think part of it is too. Is there's a shift in power going on, and there was, and sometimes the legal authorities don't like it when someone else is where that balance is being that power balance is being tested.
I think the definition of some of these words have become blurred over time as well. I mean, the golden rule, I mean, that essentially incorporates violence now too, in terms of like, well, I'm going to do unto others as they do unto me. So it's like,
yeah,
you do me, I'm going to do you, don't, but, even the definition of love, I mean, you can, take a biblical understanding of what true love is, but yet there are people in the world that feel love is solely based on sex.
Right.
So, I mean, I think part of what, but then, in terms of the connection with religion, then we go back to what Pastor Kim's saying. You've got churches that are telling people, well, you have premarital sex, you're going to burn in hell. If, you don't defend your home, it just, I think a lot of it has been influenced and the definition is changed from what it was originally intended for, that it's caused some of that to happen. And because of Christian nationalism in our churches, all denominations, it certainly makes it that much harder for us as Christians to try and, deem ourselves proper or actually loving, so that people understand, like, we all don't think the same way.
Right.
Well, that question that we asked earlier, that was talking about, like, if you could relive your life and what decisions would you make, just to maybe tie those questions together a little bit, is the unfortunate thing is when Pastor Kim shared about, the structure and things like that, I feel like even if we went back and started the denominations again, or said we weren't going to start, I think we'd end up in the same place, because like, it's almost chaotic. As free as we'd want to start something else again, or we'd love to see maybe a pole barn church, where you just get there, there's nothing, there's just no hoops to jump through, you just gather together. But eventually you get big enough where they're got to have organization, and then you start building, well, who makes the decisions, and what do we do with our resources, and how do we, and you're like, eventually I feel like we get to the same spot. It would start from, two neighborhoods do this together, and then eventually a state does it together, and we'd be back to denominational talk. And it's unfortunate, because it feels like eventually it hits a wall, but we'd end up just doing it again as humankind.
That definition of insanity, continuing to do things over and over again, expecting a different result.
Right.
Well, if you're ready, as far as our last question for today's conversation, it says in Matthew chapter 12, verse 50, Jesus says, "For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother." What are the ramifications of this saying?
Back to those familial relationships. Yeah. Some people have a really hard time having anything to do with God or love or even faith. And if they had a broken relationship with their mother or their father, those kind of things are defining. Same thing with siblings, or if you don't have any siblings, how am I supposed to understand, how to treat one another if I don't really have siblings, or if I had a poor relationship there? I think that's one of the first things that pops out when you use that language. Is it is hard. It's hard to hear that,
Right. For me, it's this belief that family isn't always blood.
Right.
That that we get to choose. We're born into a family, good or bad, but we get to choose those that we go through life with.
Right.
I have siblings that I love dearly and would do anything for, and vice versa. But I have brothers and sisters in Christ that I feel as passionately about and love and care for just as much, that I would do anything for as well. And while you guys are not blood related, you are my family.
Mm-hmm. Same.
So
yeah. And Jesus is saying we're his family,
right,
as long as we're doing what the will of God is. And I've been preaching through the 10 commandments and tying them into the two greatest commandments, but commandments 5 through 10 are all about our relationship with others. 1 through 4 are our relationship with God, and then 5 through 10 are our relationship with others, how we're supposed to live in this world. And how we're supposed to live in this world is doing the will of the Father, doing the will of God, and that makes us all related. And
well, and Matt, did you say harm, or did you say misunderstanding? Like, could you read the tail end of that question again? Like,
it says, what are the ramifications of this saying?
Because I'm looking at this maybe from a couple of different points of view of, those of us who are participating in this conversation, as clergy, or inviting, our listeners and followers to do that. Most of them probably have a relationship with Christ, already. I'm just assuming, but maybe not. But I'm looking at what are the ramifications. What about people that don't understand, fully, or have a relationship? Or what if people do and they fall off their faith wagon? How many times do we know people that have fallen away from Christ? So are we no longer family because you stepped away for a prodigal moment and you're not really doing the will of God? Or you know what I'm saying? Like, what if we've done something or find ourselves not really, caring what God thinks for a season? Have we lost that relationship? Are we no longer there? Just curious what the outsider, or maybe even the insider of faith, would think hearing that statement. Can you fall out of the family picture?
Can you lose your salvation? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. I mean, when you read it like that in and of itself with no other context, just that statement, which is literally what the question says, what if you saw that on a bumper sticker and you were particularly, not close to God, or you completely walked away to God? Do you lose that? Are you out?
I don't think so. I mean, I walked away from the church for a number of years. I wouldn't say I walked away from God. Like, I never lost my belief in God. Was our relationship great when I walked away from the church? No. But here I am now serving as a pastor after many years of being away from the church. So I guess, you can come back.
Mm-hmm.
I also think, well, then how, doesn't forgiveness and grace play in as well? And so, I mean, I think we can certainly step away from doing the will of God, but it doesn't mean that we can't come back to doing the will of God.
Right.
Right.
Just as the prodigal son came back.
Yeah.
And believe me, I'm there with you. This was just answering the question, what are the ramifications? Some people could really feel like, do I have a place to come back to? Or, am I shunned? Because some communities or churches, and especially in different denominations will be like, no.
Right.
You step away from this, or if you end up marrying that person or you don't marry them and you move in out of wedlock, you don't have a place here until you've somehow made up for that to us, and I've heard crazy stories, especially when I was younger, of like, you had a kid out of wedlock, you couldn't come back until you confessed in front of the whole church. And I'm thinking, right. Whoa, dude, what? Are you serious?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just thinking ramifications of seeing that. Some non-believers or some ones that don't have real deep roots might really struggle with that statement.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder too if a ramification is when we start using, especially in the life of the church, we start using that family type language, if it turns off outsiders.
Oh,
yeah.
Because not everyone has that Leave It to Beaver family experience. Some families are incredibly dysfunctional or broken or hurtful. They don't have a good relationship with a mother or a father or whatever, and so that the blockers go up when they hear references to brother and sister and things like that, because it hasn't been a good experience.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but in some ways, I think the scripture allows to broaden the definition of family.
Right.
And I think
That's
it's upon us to paint that picture for them. I mean, it's like the conversations we've had about holidays like Mother's Day and Father's Day.
Right.
You don't always have the best relationship with them, but it's like, or maybe you don't have, a mother or children or whatever it is, but it's like, it's not as defined as I think some people make it. Like a family is only this, where Jesus is saying like, well,
right.
Who is my mother and brothers? It's like,
right. Yeah, and that's
all them. They're mine. See this crowd behind me? Guess what? They're all family. Because
and that can be the beautiful thing about church too, is when we're living authentically for Christ, people can come into this fold and experience the love of a mother, the love of a father, the love of a brother or a sister who they are not related to. That's the hope.
Yeah. Because I mean, I can remember growing up, as a kid in the church or whatever, even though I was fortunate enough to have both my parents, there were those that were like mom and dad to me that,
right.
did things with me, took care of me, mentored me, whatever it may be. So, I mean, it's something that, as far as in terms of Christianity, it's such a broader definition than what society would define it as.
Right.
And I think, when we can't, so I guess in terms of a ramification, when we can't uphold that broader definition, then it certainly causes some of those feelings to the outsider, or, is where maybe we go wrong as churches, because we're not really welcoming everybody with open arms.
Right.
That language, I looked up, so sorry if you heard the ding. I looked up on my phone real quick, because ramifications seems like you wince and you brace yourself a little bit when you use that word, because it usually has a negative connotation. And when you're looking at the definition, Webster gives, it says there's a consequence to an action and those kind of things. So then I went further and looked up consequence. Consequence also usually has a negative connotation, but the literal definition of it is the results of an action or a choice or a decision. Well, what would be a different way to say consequence? Like a blessing that comes from something. And so I'm looking at this as ramification, maybe through that technical lens of definitions, and going, well, kind of like Curtis first brought up, was maybe there's a hope of, someone who comes into the church hoping to find that, maybe they just moved, like for instance, when we move, I don't have any family, in this town where we moved. So maybe a ramification of that statement, because it doesn't always have to take a negative connotation if we really look at that, maybe a ramification of that is that there's hope found here, that I can develop relationships where in 6 months I hope to not be alone,
Right.
in this world, kind of thing. And maybe, you'll go to the widow, the orphan, the anybody, so maybe that, if we just took away a little bit of the negative connotation that usually gets slanted with that, is what would be a ramification of this. Maybe it would literally breathe hope that, there's people that are there that believe, the same way that we do, and we might find relationship there, especially if we come broken, You like to be able to know the church is capable of being a hospital if you're hurt.
Exactly.
Well put. Well put. Well, my friends and tag team partners, our time is coming to an end this week. So before we wrap up this episode, just an opportunity, any final thoughts that you'd like to share with our viewers before we say goodbye?
Love God, love people.
Right on.
There's a title of a book that has a little bit more than that, from Shane Bishop, Pastor Kim, that says, love God, love people, don't do dumb crap.
Yeah.
It's good. It's just so,
Yeah.
It's good. A poster I have from Jen Hatmaker. It's now on our altar as we were discussing the commandments and the great commandments. Love God, love people. The end.
Nice.
There it is.
Well, I want to thank you all for joining me once again for another very, very thought-provoking discussion. And hopefully those that are watching this find something to take from it, and maybe, who knows, maybe it leads to a good dinner conversation. And, I hope you continue to enjoy what we bring forth to you each and every time we gather. And you're welcome to wrestle with us anytime. But until we get back together and join you again, peace be with you.